It's basically, this is essentially find the answer, because all that's it. But this is form in the word. This is the upload marker. So we have this folder, and then we have the upload marker.
This reminded me of interest spreads. That's what a lot.
See, here's the but it checks its limit, and then just go.
Oh, yeah?
Runs this. So Ruby, yeah.
I hate to suppose.
I mean, it's like if you ever go it's built on Ruby, it's Gem for it. It's very
And it depends on wrenches, this other almost external process that really will work, but it's set up with Ruby.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And that's the part that made me hard time wrestling with.
Yeah. There's a bit of magic there.
Okay. Very interesting.
Switching costs.
Dude, this is the Gem side.
I'll be beta tester. I guess watch out for right now.
And so, for my, the other thing I heard to do was for whatever demonstration purposes. And
All right. Since you're not working, we're gonna go ahead and start. Well, most of you. Some of you are doing a good job with that. Thank you all for coming. If you're here for Austin RB, you're in the right place. If you're here for Johnson & Johnson, that's next door. I don't know what they're doing though. Who's here for the first time? Awesome, great. We'll get introduced to everybody in a second. First of all, thank you to our sponsors. Dr. Al, Ethan, you'd like to say something real quick?
I guess I will say thank you for having us in again, and really good to see some familiar faces again the second time. Everybody who's new here, thanks for coming out. I guess I'll do a little spiel in the beginning. I don't think I have too much time for the talk, but basically the reason I'm here tonight, aside from just supporting this cool community, is that TopTal is actively looking for freelance skilled Ruby developers. So for anybody in here who's interested in freelancing with quality clients remotely, we don't have to deal with Austin traffic anymore, let me know. We can chat a little bit. I'll tell you more about what we do and answer any questions you have. But yeah, at a high level, thanks for having us in and looking forward to the talk.
Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge that there was some sort of connection here, maybe, something in the works. So it's always great to see that, when you come out to these communities, that maybe there is some sort of opportunity that, a door that gets opened. The Qdoba stuff isn't as easy to take home as the pizza. And I don't have a car today, so it is incumbent on all of you to finish it before the end of the night. So please make sure your plates are full. Hi. Also thank you to our sponsor, Capital Factory, for the location, as always. And I sponsor the Meetup group. We do have a code of conduct, which is on our Meetup page. So if you've been to our Meetup page, Austin RB, one of the pages there, one of the links there is the code of conduct. Summarize it, be nice to each other, be welcoming, make this a space that is welcoming and open to everybody. Quick link, austinrb.org, which will link you to the meetup, so we'll redirect to the meetup if you don't want to look for it. We do have a Slack channel. Anybody in the Slack can invite anybody else. So if you're not in there, but you're sitting next to somebody who is, ask them to invite you, or tweet at AustinRB and I'll add you. Any questions so far?
How do you add a person? Like, can I add a person?
Yeah, you can add a person. On some of the menu, usually.
Okay.
says invite people.
Okay, cool.
You should all be able to see that link. Not all of the links, but at least that one. Probably. All right. A couple of announcements. Keep Ruby Weird is in its 5th installation and probably final installation. So they're doing a super discount from $55,555 to just $105.55. So it's our local regional Ruby conference. It's a little bit weird usually because it's got a bunch of off to the left topics. I don't know what the other than weird topics. So it's a good day full of just seeing people. Some people come. I think last year or the year before had people come from Russia and different places just for that. So that's kind of interesting. You get people from all over the world, but also all of the famous Rubies around the country that also come. So that's a good one. So if you haven't got your ticket yet, go ahead and do that. Another announcement, wait, did I say November 9th? That's what it is. RubyConf is November 13th to 15th. That's in LA, it's not here, but still. Who's going to RubyConf? Nobody. Who's going to Keep Ruby Weird? Great, all right. Support your local conferences over the national ones. But usually there is still a good Austin showing at RubyConf and RailsConf, so, if you want to go, there will always be somebody who's familiar there. I'll open it up if anybody else has an announcement. I have one. I've got 2 episodes on Ruby Tapas live, so check them out. Very proud of those. I might show the videos here someday, but I don't like listening to myself speak, so that's different. Anybody else has any announcement they'd like to share? Yeah.
There is going to be the first ever developer week, November 6th through 8th here in town. So people might be interested in that. There's a lot of speakers and stuff like that. It's not Ruby specific, but it is developer specific.
That's good. Developer week. All right. There's Design Week happening soon, right? Next week? In the following weeks? Something like that.
This week.
This week?
I thought it was this week, but I could be wrong.
Might be. I'm off a little bit by my weeks because I was traveling, so I don't know what week it is. But if anybody's interested in that, that's still there too. Good news, validation is back. They took it away for a while, and now it's back. So if you parked in this building, in the parking this building, ask the people at the front desk for validation.
That's always a big issue for me. I usually spend half an hour looking for parking. Where is the entrance for parking here that we could get validated?
It's like right here, yeah.
Because I'm always like 6 blocks.
Yeah, so it's $7 with the validation. So yeah, 7 and Brazos, if you're coming off Congress, you take a right at 7th, and you'll see it to your left side. There's also 2 blocks down, so there's the church, and then there's the open parking right next to it, which is usually $6 the entire day. So I usually opt for that because it's cheaper if I'm here the entire day, but also free parking around, which might be hard right now with all the people around, all the conferences around. So those are the couple of options that you have.
Wait, what was it, the $6 a day?
There's an open parking. It's called premium parking. If you look up premium parking, and they'll have multiple lots around. So it's so the same 7th or 8th Street, whichever way you're coming, but not the church, the lot next to it.
Okay.
So, all right. Since we've got a couple people who are new here, we'll do intros quickly. My name is Yusuf. I run a company called Bear and Giraffe. I do software consulting, mostly Ruby on Rails type of stuff, and I do fractional CTO for startups who don't have a technical partner. Not looking to hire at the moment or looking for a job, but I always say if I get a new project, I might be looking to hire somebody. The icebreaker I chose for today is sort of preemptively for Halloween, what your costume is going to be this year, if you have picked one already, because I know all the stores have been selling you Halloween stuff for the past 2 months. So you gotta be quick, because next week we'll probably start the Christmas stuff. I don't do Halloween, so I don't have a costume. I come as myself. That's just been the thing. In college, I used to joke that I dressed up as a terrorist, which is like this. But, and that's me.
I'm John. I don't really have any plans for Halloween yet. I'll see how that goes. I'm still looking for a job. I've been looking for a job for a while here, and that's why I'm pursuing Ruby. I am working on a particular project where I could use some guidance with regard to Sidekick. So I'd be willing to pay for a couple hours worth of training if somebody here is a Sidekick expert, or maybe even not an expert. You've got like a little bit of more experience than I do. To me, you're an expert. So Mike's pretty much an expert to me, even though he says he isn't. But anyway, just to let you know, thanks.
All right.
Heather, I work at Rapid7. I do Ruby and Cube to test our product expos. Not hiring, not looking, at least on our team, and I'm not doing the Halloween thing either. I'm giving out the candy.
Okay, that works. What's your favorite candy then?
Reese's Pieces.
There you go.
That's a good one.
So that will be plan B if you don't have it.
Should be a Reese's Piece. I'm Will Vu. I work for Rapid7. I do security research and development. Not hiring or looking. Halloween cosplay. I don't really do Halloween, but I've been joking about being shortstop from Indiana Jones, so might work. Yep.
Cool.
Hi, Jody Villanueva. I work for a company called Logical. We're a remote out of here. We're based in San Francisco. So I'm a support engineer. This is the actual role. Titles, like, I don't know, I forget now. But yeah, over the last year, I've kind of gone back into our engineering team. I was in the customer-facing role prior to that. So I'm looking to kind of just reach back out to the community and see what's around, so I can start leveling up my skills. Right now I'm doing more scripts with Ruby, but looking to evolve that to more development, what tools around what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm not sure actually what my company's looking at the moment, but we may be on the look. I mean, I think we are always kind of keeping our eye open for Rails developers, full stack, and also I think also some people who have more of a focus on this back end. So LOGIKCULL.com. I can talk anyway afterwards. Halloween costume, I actually haven't decided, but I have a young son who's 5 and he's intent on being a ninja, so just to get a shield. So I might have some kind of complimentary costume.
The turtle variety or the regular?
Yeah, just a regular one. If it was like turtle variety, that would work as like a family outfit. But you can't take part. Yes.
Hi, Anne. I am doing content work in Rails right now. As far as I know, so I'm not looking actively. We may be looking to bring on another person who's maybe senior to do some light contract or full-time hours maybe. Don't know, not sure. But if that sounds remotely interesting to you, let me know. As for my Halloween situation, like everyone else, I have a Halloween plan, which makes me kind of sad because I used to really like Halloween because it was the most fun holiday. But now I have no plans, so I guess I'll just eat Milky Ways.
So Milky Way is your favorite candy?
No, well, no, not necessarily, but like of the, it's gonna be in the bag of Halloween stuff. Yes, in the freezer. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can see that.
Hey, I'm Mike. I'm a remote Rails developer for a small startup, so we're not hiring, but I don't have Halloween plans yet.
So the candy,
You'll be eating Milky Ways too.
Yes.
yeah?
I don't think so.
There will be a fight for the Milky Way.
My name's Carly. I'm a Flatiron student doing the full stack web development program. I am also a co-organizer for the Austin Arduino and microcontroller meetup. I'm not hiring because I'm not employed, and I'm not looking yet, but I will be in the new year. And I have no plans for Halloween, which is really disappointing because it's my favorite holiday. And I don't eat candy because I'm on keto, so I'll be drinking lots of cold brew coffee. It'll be great.
You can dress up as a coffee bean.
There you go.
I think we need a Halloween party.
Yeah.
We can make that our November meetup.
Everybody's got to come in a costume.
Yes.
My name's Ethan. I'm the North America Community Lead at TopTal. I started off as a front-end developer several years ago. And spent most of my time freelancing. That's how I came across TopTal. I ended up loving the experience, and now I am an employee of the company and am swagged out from head to toe most days. Hiring. So, in case anybody hasn't heard of us, what we are is a freelance matching service. So, for anybody who's a talented freelancer in your field, we can help match you with top-notch clients all over the world. We take care of all the vetting and screening, all the billing, just allow you to focus on what you do best, which is coding. So, in that respect, we are always looking for talented freelancers. Ruby, huge demand there. A lot of front-end stuff. And then some of the more emerging technologies, like if you're into blockchain, Python data science right now is huge. Basically, all the areas you think there will be demand, we're always looking for skilled people. So, in terms of Halloween, I also don't have any plans, but I'll say this. I have always been a big fan of like the understated Halloween costumes, like the guy who shows up as I'm gonna throw out street clothes. And there was a friend of mine who showed up to a party one time. Everybody thought he didn't even have a costume on until somebody saw there was a tag on his arm, like one of those gift card tags, and it literally just said, "From God to women." I have always loved that. Never had the chutzpah to put it on myself, but that is that's the one that comes to mind. Also, I sincerely think we need a Halloween party with this group because this is getting a little bit.
I sent an event organizer.
Yeah.
There you go, you took on that role, good job.
You're talking about little costumes when we think of the guy who like put on a suit with no tie and put a band-aid up here, who's like Mayhem, commercial.
Yes.
Ooh, okay, my name is Hal Fulton. I work for Simplify, which is based in Fort Worth. That's simpli.fi. They had to like pull some strings with the guy in Finland because you can't get a Finnish domain unless you have an address there. They probably are hiring, but they probably want you to move to Fort Worth, and I don't recommend it. I am one of those, I'm part of a vanishing breed that is an expert in Ruby, but I don't know Rails. And if that perplexes you, we can talk later. But, let's face it, Ruby was around for at least 12 years before Rails existed. But anyway, what were the other questions? Halloween costume? I actually am buying bits and pieces to put one together. Going to be some kind of robot. I bought a silver mask, a weird wraparound sunglasses thing. I'm trying to put like LEDs behind it, stuff like that.
The costume's gonna be the most awesome costume in the whole room.
I hope so.
So far at least.
How many holidays start with Hal? It's like, if I were Christ, I could claim Christmas, Halloween is it. Please.
skeletons, a shard, and, but his first Halloween, we actually did a full-on family costume. I was Princess Leia. I made a newborn costume for my son, and my husband was Chewbacca. So that was
My name is Mike. I'm a front-end developer. I actually don't think I've worked in Ruby in a year at least, but like to keep up with it just in case I'm like doing front-end on a Rails project at some point in the future. My fiance and I are going to be characters from the show Parks and Recreation for Halloween.
Who are you gonna be?
Burt Macklin and Janet Snakel. It's a bit of a deep cut, but
Yeah.
My name is Jeff. I work at a company called You Earned It, which our headquarters is right here in Capitol Tower, 2 blocks north. I just took on that role as a senior engineering manager, and while I've got a history of full stack development across a lot of stacks, Ruby's not one of them, so that's why I'm here. Distant second reason why I'm here, we are hiring, and I'm the hiring manager for some of our roles. We're looking for mid or senior level Ruby on Rails devs, so talk to me if you're interested. Halloween costume, You Earned It apparently has a pretty intense contest, so I had to think of something and bring it this year. So I'm going as the Grandmaster from Thor Ragnarok, because I've had success. I've had success with becoming Jeff Goldblum's characters in the past. Off we go again.
And welcome to the dark side, by the way. So,
You're talking about the costume or the Ruby?
Ruby.
Hey, I'm Austin. I work for a company called Autolus. Actually just started there. I know they're looking, but I don't know for what, probably all sorts of engineers, full stack, front-end, DevOps. As far as, Ruby experience, I started with Rails and I've been Ruby for about 5 or 6 years off and on, but it's kind of gotten JavaScript from years ago, so we're doing that. Halloween, unlikely that I'll be doing anything for Halloween, although I'm always told that I should go to Waldo, so. I like Fargo coming there, so.
All right, we'll let Matt introduce himself right when we're about to start. How did you want to plug the thing that was mentioned on Slack, or leave that for later?
I forgot what thing we're talking about.
The one that Nona mentioned, the workshop you were trying to put together.
Oh, yeah. Nolan and I have been talking about putting together a workshop for people who want to learn Ruby. We're thinking of something that might cover like 8 hours or so one weekend, and we'd probably assume like not much knowledge of Ruby, and we'll put together some kind of project that was not web related. It might be a library or a desktop app or something, or there might even be a web component to it. But, yeah, we haven't got very far with the details, and we just sort of floated the idea. So if anybody is interested, you can talk to me about it.
Yeah. So there was already a post on Slack, so if you're interested, if this intrigues you, reply to him directly there, or just get in touch with him and figure it out. Nora brought it up is that this might be an opportunity to help fundraise for Hal's mom for some medical expenses.
Well, originally I was trying to buy her a vision aid. There are these, I don't know if you're aware, but there are electronic aids for people with severe macular degeneration nowadays. It looks like a VR headset, but basically it just uses like a phone type camera and it projects images onto your eyes. So, but I think she's kind of past the point now that that's useful to her. She is 89 and a half and is declining very fast. But, whatever money we do make, will probably go to her in some form or fashion. Because right now, I'm basically pouring, my inheritance cost of keeping her alive has just exceeded my take-home pay. So I'm relying strictly on the things my parents saved up. And that'll be fine. I'll put every last twig into keeping her alive if I have to. But you know how it is.
All right, so help yourself, and also help Hal with that workshop. If that's of interest to you, please get in touch with Hal.
But on a lighter note,
Okay.
just because I don't want to end on that, I want to mention, while I'm thinking about it, that Matt was once an actor in a play that I wrote. So, small world. If he remembers that, or if he's blocked the memory, I don't know. I just thought I would pass that on to you.
I live right down the street from that theater now, so I think about it as I'm driving by.
Like to tell us a little bit more?
It was in Frontera Fest. You'll know Frontera Fest? It's like the one-act play kind of festival that happens every year in Austin. Yeah, we were, what was Relativity and...
Mr. Underfoot.
Yeah, that's the last play I was in.
All right, well, without further ado then, the actor slash developer, Matt Buck, I'll let him introduce himself.
If y'all don't know, Hal wrote, oh my gosh.
The Ruby Way.
The Ruby Way, thank you. The Ruby Way, very famous Ruby book, inspired the creation of Rails, which makes it all the more ironic that he doesn't use it.
If he had just called it something else.
All right. There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Buck, the co-founder and CTO of a company here in Austin called Voxable. So we're a conversational interface agency. And so if anyone is familiar with any of these devices up here, we got a Google Home, Amazon Alexa, a little chat bot there. So that's what a conversational interface is. That's an interface that allows a human to speak to a computer. And so that might be a voice interface, it might be something you're interacting with over text, and that is what we focus on. So this is our office in Hyde Park. We're right across the street from Quacks, if you know the area, like 43rd and Duval. So my fiance and I founded Voxable 3 years ago. You can't quite see it there in the photo, but on our door is our mission statement. It's helping humans and machines better understand each other. So we do that by helping companies design, develop, and market these conversational interfaces. We also provide custom training and consulting around conversational interfaces. Here's one of the things we built. This is called Abby. This was if you went to South by Southwest last year and you talked to South by Southwest on Facebook Messenger, this was like the virtual assistant that was available to folks on Facebook Messenger. We worked with South by's emerging technology team, so I can get the info I need about the schedule, either by like clicking on buttons to see my menu, browsing through galleries, or I can just ask a question. What time is Courtney Barnett playing? What's happening at Swan Dive on Thursday night? That type of thing. So command line interfaces, they're interesting to me professionally because they're kind of one of the first ways that we developed of communicating with machines, right? We need to communicate our intent to the computer, have it do something and respond back to us. So quick plug, since I'm here, if you're interested in this type of thing, you want to learn how to build conversational interfaces, we've got our second conversational design workshop coming up on November 12th. It's going to be at the TCEA Conference Center, really great conference center out in Southeast Austin. If you're looking to hold any events, talk to them. They're great. They're a nonprofit. You don't have to pay the hotel tax. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about how to design, develop conversational interfaces, working with Dialogflow, that type of thing. We got a discount code for y'all, Ruby 2018. It'll get you 10% off. Cool. So let's start by talking about just what exactly is a command line interface. So CLI is one of the simplest forms, like we said, of a human-computer interface. So according to Wikipedia, it's a means of interacting with a computer program where the user issues commands in the form of successive lines of text. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here, the history of the command line interface. So this goes back to a machine called a teleprinter, or a teletype. Anybody familiar with a teletype? From the name, you might be able to guess what it does, right? So you got two machines, these are like two typewriters, and you have one person in one typewriter in their office in New York City, and another person sitting at their typewriter in their office in LA, and I type a key on my typewriter in New York, and it's going to print out in the printer over in the typewriter in the LA office. So it allows me to print things remotely. So this is primarily a means of communication, right? So I'd have an operator at one end, they could send a message to the user at the other end, that user could send back a response. So over here on the left, these are actually some teletype operators from World War II. So they could broadcast messages. You could have a ring of machines that were all listening. So the AP could broadcast news bulletins this way to newsrooms all over the country. So initially humans were at either end of that conversation, right? And then eventually one end of that conversation was just replaced with a computer. So I would send a command to the machine and it would output its response by printing it on the printer. So this mode of interaction actually survived the introduction of computers. So early computer displays were actually nicknamed glass teletypes or glass TTYs. So it was the same idea. It might be running the same exact program, except now instead of it printing out the response, it's appearing for me on this monitor. So many were thin or dumb terminals, so they didn't actually have any processing power of their own. They were communicating with a central mainframe that was actually running the program. So what you're looking at here is a DEC VT100. So if you ever see your terminal app referencing like the VT100 standard, this is the machine that it's talking about, a machine from the 1960s that we are still using as our standard mode of interacting with this is a Unix system. So a shell, what we're looking at, sort of, we can barely see it here. That's the outermost layer around the kernel. Yeah, do you think can I turn the lights off? Is that cool? I've got some low contrast stuff in here. Is that good with everybody? Okay, cool. It's going to be a lot easier to see. All right. So, yeah, in Unix, the early shells, they're all command line interfaces, right? So V6, that's the first Unix shell that came out of Bell Labs in 1971. Eventually that gets replaced by Bourne in 1977, and then the Bourne Again shell. So that's Bash, Bourne Again shell. That's the default shell for most Unix systems now. That was released in 1989. So you can find Bash. That's going to be like the terminal app on your Mac, PowerShell on Windows. Eventually the command line interface gets replaced by the GUI. The graphical user interface is the primary user interface for computers. But we're still basically, and I'm telling you this history to let you know that we're still essentially emulating teletype machines, right? Like we enter a command, the computer does something, it gives us back the command. So we're like emulating this over a half-century old form of technology still in the way that many, at least technical folks, deal with their computers. So some projects like Hyperterm sort of give us like a glimpse of how we can sort of move beyond text-based CLIs. So Hyperterm, it's like an Electron-based terminal. Electron's the framework from GitHub that you can use like web technologies to build desktop apps. So it has some neat features. I can do things like cat an image and it'll render the image in line, and like gives us like because it's web-based, I can, build little React or Vue components to do wacky things on the command line, actually add some interactivity. But for the moment, we're still stuck with pretending like we're on a teletype machine. So let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of a command line interface. So here I'm entering a machine on my DEC VT100, and so I've got my prompt right there. That might give me some information about the system there. It's displaying the tilde to let me know which directory I'm in. That's the home directory. Got the executable, the name of the program I actually want to call. I'll have some options. We'll talk about how those work in a minute. And then some arguments. And so those are the objects, usually the files and the directories we're going to be dealing with. So options, those are the things that are actually going to affect the command's behavior. So I might have the long form option there. That just means it's prefixed with 2 dashes and it's actually spelled out in full words. Most of those long form options are also going to have a short form version. So ignore case might, I don't know for sure if, does anyone know what grep-i is? I assume it's ignore case, but I'm not positive. This thing is going to, okay, cool. There's the, so a short form version, single dash, and then a single letter. And then there's also switches, so that ignore case, that's a switch, which means it's a Boolean option, so its presence is going to activate the ignore case functionality, and then there are flags. And flags actually accept arguments, because I'm just passing an integer there, I can just pass it, but if I needed to, pass a string with some spaces in it, I might say, C equals, and then pass in a full string with quotation marks around it. Cool, so options, arguments, most CLIs, that's all that they're going to need. But a notable exception would be something like Git. So Git is a command suite application. So it has a CLI, but it actually exposes a number of commands. Git commit, git pull, git push. So I can either have some global options that are going to be passed to Git directly. And then after the command itself, I'll have some command options that are only going to apply to that command, and then the arguments that are for the entirety of the command. Cool. So there are also REPLs. So a REPL is a read, evaluate, print loop. And in Ruby, the one that we would be most familiar with is IRB, right? Interactive Ruby. So again, much like a teletype machine, this goes into a loop where it reads a command, evaluates it, prints out the response, and then performs that loop again. Git shell is another popular REPL, so if you don't like typing git before every git command, try out git shell. That's basically all it does. It puts you into a REPL where your git commands are going to be recognized. You can just say pull, push, commit, etc. If you want to go deeper, you can actually provide a fully interactive console environment. That would be like something that Metasploit does. By the way, raise your hand if you ever heard of Metasploit. Okay, not many folks. I'm going to let y'all know, since y'all are here at a Ruby meetup, you should check it out. It's one of the most popular open source pen testing projects in the entire world. I used to work for Metasploit. We got the Rapid7 folks. Rapid7 owns Metasploit. So definitely check it out. It's a way of sharing vulnerability code, sharing exploits in the penetration testing community. So if you're ever interested in checking out network security stuff, definitely check out Metasploit. They get bonus points for excellent use of ASCII art. Every time you open the Metasploit console, you get a different cool Haxor ASCII art. Cool, so let's talk about a few CLI libraries that we can use in the Ruby world. So one rule when you're working with Rails is always check the framework before you add a new dependency, right? Because the framework has probably got that thing that you think you need to add a new gem for. Usually you're going to find it in active support. And the same is really true of Ruby. Always check the standard library because there's usually some cool stuff in there that you might not have known about. And in the case of building command line interfaces, if we look to the standard library, we'll find this class called option parser. So it's pretty simple. It doesn't give us a whole bunch, but basically it's going to take the text that comes after my executable name and parse out from that string all of the options and the arguments. So you can see here I'm just defining a block where I've got a simple little banner that's going to appear if I ask for help. I'm declaring a single verbose option. Again, I'm giving it like an actual description in case folks look for the actual help of this command. And then I'm just, because it's a flag, I want to know whether or not it's present. So we can see what actually happens when I run that. If I run it with a -v, verbose gets set to true in my option hash, and without it, it just doesn't appear. Cool, so moving on to some actual gems, there's Highline. I would bet dollars to donuts if you've run bundle update or bundle install at some point in the past decade, you've probably seen Highline appear. This is from James Edward Gray, luminary of the Ruby community, dependency for a lot of popular Ruby gems. It's from the README, it says it's designed to ease the tedious tasks of doing console input and output with low-level methods like gets and puts. So you can see here some of the stuff it's going to give me, like just looking for a default answer. I can use CLI ask. I can actually set some validation on those inputs if I want to. I could do type conversion. I can actually ask for passwords and make sure that I'm masking that input so that I'm not watching someone type in their password on the console. I can even build some like interactive menus as well. A lot of cool stuff in Highline. It's actually a dependency of some of these other libraries we'll look at as well. So with regards to just these kind of option parsers gems, there's many, many different choices. I'm just covering some of the ones that seem like they're still mostly active. So there's SLOP. And this stands for Simple Lightweight Options Parser. Very similar to Options Parser in the standard lib. Tries to be a bit more feature rich and have a very easy to remember API. So you can see I call parse there. And then I'm just defining the short form and the long form of the option as well as its data type and some help text. So there's Optimist. This used to be, like many Ruby libraries, had a very unfortunate name and got renamed. Now it's called Optimist. It's also aiming to be very simple, have sensible defaults, and give you some automatic help text generation as well. So moving on into the more kind of heavyweight options, you could consider these sort of like CLI frameworks. There's Clamp. So this offers a class-based DSL for creating commands. So you can see there I'm defining this class speak command, and then I've got these class level macros where I'm defining my options, and then I have the execute method that's actually going to represent the logic of the command itself. There's also Commander. This one's also still very active. It actually uses Highline and Options Parser under the hood. And so much more robust, has several more features than the bare options parsing libraries. And also, very similar syntaxes to the ones we've seen before. And also looks very similar to my personal favorite, which is called a library called GLI. And this is the library we'll be mainly focusing on today. More of a fully featured CLI framework. Aims to give you properly formatted help commands. Actually give you, create the ability for you to create that kind of command suite. So having subcommands, as well as providing the subcommand option parsing, global options, file-based configuration. And this is very, very popular option as well. Likely, I think, the most popular of the CLI framework gems. But like I said, there are a ton of these. I would definitely recommend you check out this category in the Ruby Toolbox. There's another question. Who here is familiar with the Ruby Toolbox or heard of that before? So Ruby Toolbox is a website that you should definitely bookmark right now. It's fantastic. It kind of fell by the wayside for a little while. There was recently an effort to revive it. So basically what they've done is just kind of created a number of different categories for different types of gems, for different goals that you might have. And then they allow you to sort those by various different criteria, when's the last time they had a release, how many stars do they have on GitHub, that type of thing. The goal being just to help you find good, viable, still maintained open source projects. That's one of the primary challenges of working with open source is if I'm going to choose this dependency, I want to make sure that it's got a good community. If I had to Stack Overflow, I need to be able to find an answer. If I find a bug, I would hope that someone's going to help me fix it. So check out Ruby Toolbox. So today I'm going to be focusing on an open source command line interface we developed at Voxable called Expando. So Expando was built, as I mentioned, using GLI. So the purpose of Expando is to help teams build what are called natural language understanding models. So I won't get too deep into what that is, but very, quite simply, natural language understanding is what allows someone who's building a voice interface or a chatbot to take raw human speech and then turn it into something that a machine can understand. And so one of the primary ways we're doing that is for each intent that a user might be trying to express to us. Here they're trying to tell us they want to find out if they can return something, obviously. Then we need to come up with every possible way that we think a user might express that to us so we can build a machine learning model so that when we see the user send some text or we transcribe what they just said to the Alexa, we can run it through that model, it can make a guess I think they're trying to ask you if they can return something. So when you're building out these lists of user utterances, there's a lot of repetition. And maintaining these lists, these can run into hundreds or thousands of utterances. Maintaining them gets to be really painful. So one thing we realized early on was it would be nice if we kind of had a shorter syntax. So that's what that is up at the top. I can write that one line of expando, and then it's going to create a Cartesian product of those phrases that you see separated by pipes in the parentheses there, and actually spit that out right there. It also hooks up to Dialogflow, which is Google's natural language understanding service, and updates my models on Dialogflow. So this was something we needed in our own work. We built it for one of our client projects. Our client was kind enough to let us open source it. And so because I am a Rubyist, I built it in Ruby. So let's talk a little bit about the principles of great command line interfaces. So for this talk, I referenced and leaned pretty heavily on this book here, it was published in 2013 by Pragprog. It's Build Awesome Command Line Applications in Ruby 2. It was published in 2013, so half a decade old, but really that just means some of the libraries they reference, the examples might not be totally up to date, but a lot of the core information is still really, really good and really valuable. So if you're looking to build a CLI in Ruby, definitely give this a look.
What are you using to recreate the CRT effect there?
Good question. So this is an app called Cathode. Yeah, it's pretty excellent. It has like a number of really old CRT monitors that it does really wild emulations of, as you'll see right here.
Yeah, I could never use that for long enough. Eventually it got to be really annoying.
Yeah, I don't typically use it. This is honestly all I use it for, is doing terminal examples in my talks, but it's really great for that. Cool, so I'm going to be talking about some of the principles that came from this book, and one of those principles is be easy to use. And one of the ways that we can make a command line interface easy to use is by offering tab completion. So bash tab completion, that just means that I can type a single character of either one of my commands or one of my arguments, and it's actually going to help me complete the rest of that after I type that. So you can see if I leave it empty and I type tab, it's just going to show me, well, here are all of your remote or all of your local branches that you might want to push to origin. So how do we achieve tab completion? So when you're using GLI, and this is just a sample right from their documentation, you can just include this little snippet in your bash RC. And so basically, the way that this works is when I'm building with GLI, I get this built-in help command. And it takes this optional switch, C, that will actually list all of my commands in sorted order. And that's going to make it suitable for use in a bash completion script like this. So all I need to do is add something like this. So for my example, it might be get expando targets, expando function, get expando targets. And then I'm just running expando help -C. And that's what's actually going to give me that properly formatted list. Tab completion is a really, really great thing to add to your CLI in terms of making it easier to use and improving the discoverability as well. So discoverability is like folks just messing around and figuring out how things work on their own. If you give them tab completion, it's much easier to do. So another principle is be helpful. So here I'm running expando help. You can see I get this really nicely formatted, as I would expect, man page style documentation. And this was very, very easy to achieve. And you can see that, so when I run help, I can see, well, there's a update command. So what are the options I can pass to update? Well, I'll just run expando update -- help, and it'll show me the help for that particular subcommand as well. So this is the GLI code as well as the documentation. So you can see that it works a bit like documenting a rake task, right? So the documentation, the natural language documentation appears right there with my desc or long desc methods. And then I'm also defining not only examples, but the commands themselves. And so I've got this update command at the top level, and then nested within that, I can put all of my subcommands. So I've got an update entities subcommand nested underneath there with all of its help text right alongside, and that's all I have to do, and it's going to create that properly formatted help command for me. So another principle of building a good CLI is to play well with others. And so this is really about being a good Unix shell citizen. So there are a number of conventions we should really adhere to when we're building for Nix systems, and one of those is going to be exit codes. So an exit code is just the way that a process reports its status to its parent, to whatever called it. So if you have an exit code of 0, that indicates that you were successful, and any other value is failure. There are some standards you can try to adhere to for what those other values mean, but at its core, it's either you exit with 0 to say, okay, cool, this worked, or you exit with another value to indicate that there was a problem. And so if you're familiar with the exit method in Ruby, that's what that is for. So if I say exit 0, I'm just saying you can report that the outcome was successful. So another way we can try to play well with others with our command line interfaces is with what are called output streams. So if you've ever heard someone refer to either standard output or standard error, that's what these are. So you have, these are your two basic output streams. So if I say puts foo, then that's sending some output to standard output. And that's where I want to put essentially any message that isn't an error. If I have an error message specifically, then I would want to use standard error puts, and that's what's actually going to send that output to the standard error output stream. And that way, my parent can actually differentiate between the normal output and error messages. So I could say standard error puts, there was a problem, exit 1, and the caller is going to know that there was an issue. So another way that we can build an awesome CLI is by making configuration really easy. And this is another thing that GLI also makes really easy to do. So in GLI, we can just call this config file method. So in Expando, you can have a .expando.rc. And this is going to, like in Expando, we need some configuration variables to access dialog flow that can be sent as options, but we don't want to require the user to like paste that in every single time. We don't want that showing up in their history, for example. So GLI makes this really easy. If I use that config file method, then it's going to look for a file with that name, read in the YAML, and apply the contents of that file as defaults for any of the options in my options hash. And it actually creates a new command for me as well called initconfig. So I can say expando initconfig to actually generate a base config file for me if it doesn't already exist. And that's one of the features that makes, I think, GLI one of your best options if you're looking to build a CLI in Ruby. There's nothing really comparable like that in any of the other libraries. So another thing we can do to make our CLI easier to use is to add some color, right? Some formatting, some interactivity. This is something I think we could learn from the Node community. A lot of your standard Node libraries do a really great job with incorporating color, incorporating emoji. You can render emoji in your terminal. So if you run like a yarn install, you'll see the cool little truck emoji as your laptop sounds like it's taking off. So one really great collection of gems is called TTY. If you just Google Ruby TTY, remember TTY teletype. Collection of really great utility libraries for building command line interfaces. And here I've highlighted just a few, but there's really a ton. So there's Pastel. So Pastel is for rendering terminal color strings. So if you want to colorize text in the terminal, it's this crazy series of like ANSI escape codes that make that happen. Pastel gives you a really simple API for just saying, hey, I want this string to be purple, bold, etc. There's TTY Pager for doing cross-platform paging. So that's like using less or more. If you have a bunch of output and you want to allow someone to page through it. There's TTY Progress Bar if you have like a long-running job and you'd like to indicate to the user how long that's going to take. Render a progress bar. You can do it in text. There's all kinds of wacky things you can do in text that you didn't realize you could do. You can create terminal spinners with TTY Spinner. We actually make use of TTY table and Expando. So here I'm doing Expando list intents. And so intents are like a list of all of my intent files where I have all my utterances listed out there in Expando. So in those intent files, we allow you to put some YAML front matter up at the top if you need to tell us anything or share any information about that intent with other users. And so just saying list intents will actually render that out as a nicely formatted table right there in your terminal.
Do those, I was looking at the table there. Does TTY table use Unicode characters? Or does it use the old-fashioned line drawing characters or what?
Yeah, it's using Unicode characters. And there's actually like a number of different options. I think you can specify exactly which characters you want, but then it has like a number of different themes, like out of the box as well. And here I'm just giving you an example of some of the spinners that TTY Spinners provides. Again, either just using standard ANSI characters or using some Unicode characters in a cool way. Just to give you some wacky spinners, let your user know that the program is not frozen, it's doing a thing, unless it printed out a spinner and then froze. So, once you've got your CLI created, we need to have a way to distribute it painlessly. So, Ruby gems come to mind immediately, right? This is a way to painlessly distribute software to other Ruby users and folks that are familiar with Ruby and know perhaps how to use RB and V if they need to, or change Ruby or RVM to manage multiple versions of Ruby, and know what those things mean, and probably know what bundler is and stuff like that. If you're dealing with a group of users for whom none of those things are true, then requiring them to first install the proper version of Ruby on their system, make sure they have Ruby gems installed, perhaps install bundler as well. It dramatically increases the complexity of the installation of your command line interface. So users might not have the right version. They might have installed it, but they installed it in the wrong place, and so your gem isn't going to work because it's not in the default location. So problems like this are problems that many folks in the Ruby community who've created CLIs that were meant to be used broadly are very familiar with. Metasploit folks are very familiar with these issues. So the folks at Fusion, of Fusion Passenger fame, created something called Traveling Ruby. So the idea was you could create these self-contained, portable Ruby binaries. So the idea is we're going to package all of Ruby with your CLI. So it works. It has some caveats. It's only going to support a number of popular gems, so it might not actually support the gem you want to use. Obviously, you can't use any gems that are going to have native dependencies. And I believe that it only supports up to Ruby 1.9. I might not be correct about that. I couldn't find that in the documentation today. I thought I'd seen that before. But importantly, it's also no longer really actively developed. Really cool because it enables the cross-packaging support. Means I can compile my Windows binaries without needing to set up a Windows machine to do that. But it does have some pretty important limiting caveats as well. So another newer option is something called enclose.io. If you head to enclose.io, you'll see that they offer a service for inspired by Go and the ability to create binaries for every platform very painlessly. They thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could do that for Node and Ruby binaries? So same idea. It's actually going to package the entirety of a Ruby interpreter along with your CLI. So you might end up with something in the realm of like 25, 30 megabytes for your CLI, but it's going to work. And if anyone complains, just be like, how long did that take to download? 5 seconds? Cool, longer than this conversation. One downside is it's going to require access to a Windows machine if you actually want to create some exe builds, but it does support newer Ruby versions. And importantly, it's still actively maintained as well. So another company that kind of, that's I guess a little bit bigger than Voxable, called Heroku, they also dealt with this problem. So if you're a Heroku user, you'd likely use the Heroku command line interface. I would definitely recommend checking out this blog post if you're thinking about building a CLI and Ruby and kind of the pros and cons. Versions 1 through 3 of the Heroku CLI were actually written purely in Ruby. But they were running into a lot of the same issues, right? So it was difficult to keep the Ruby environment for a user's application separate from the one that the CLI was using, avoiding the kind of version mismatch and gem mismatch problems, ensuring that they had a Ruby binary that didn't conflict with anything on the user's machine was a really big headache. So because of these problems, they decided to move for versions 4 through 5. They were thinking maybe we'll write everything in Go at the time, so they kind of rewrote the core of the CLI in Go and then have this plugin system, so the commands were implemented as Node plugins. Eventually they scrapped Go and decided to go entirely in Node. As a result of that, they created this open source CLI framework, or Oak which is really cool. Got a lot of really interesting features. Has the, you can set up very easily across platform build pipelines. You can build your executables for all the various platforms. Makes it super, super simple to document and test commands. Build a plugin architecture, so Heroku, the CLI allows you to download plugins to add various kinds of functionality. And it's written entirely in TypeScript, which, you know, if you follow JavaScript, stop writing JavaScript, folks, it's all TypeScript now. So this is kind of where I'm at right now. So we wrote this CLI in Ruby thinking primarily we'll be using it ourselves, maybe we can get some other people to use it. We did. That was cool. But as we worked with more clients, we realized that this CLI is something that sometimes technical folks are going to be using, but they're probably not Ruby developers. Most of the development in this space is in most spaces in software now is in Node. So it makes it harder to grow the community. And it makes it tough to actually get something installed on someone's system if they're on like a writing team or a marketing team. They still want to be able to contribute to the Expando natural language understanding repo. So we're kind of going through this process and deciding, okay, do we want to use something like enclose, or do we want to bite the bullet, rewrite everything in TypeScript? My answer is no. I prefer to avoid writing JavaScript when I can. I have to, when I can. I still do a fair amount of front-end work, so obviously JavaScript. Yeah, this is kind of where we're at now, at this fork in the road. Is it like, if you can't beat them, join them scenario, and we decide to just bite the bullet and do a full rewrite and get all the fancy things we can get from Oak, which is backed by Salesforce. We know it's going to be around for a while. Or do we stick to our guns and keep writing it in Ruby, and maybe the community doesn't grow quite as quickly, but if we can at least get some binaries that folks can use without worrying about getting RB and V running on their system. So if you have any input, please talk to me afterwards, because we still have not totally made a decision. I'm the only engineer at the company, so signing up for a rewrite of this library we spent a couple years on doesn't sound fun, but we've got some clients that want to use it, and they're kind of stuck right now. So that's where we're at. Here are my credits, and that's it. Thanks so much, y'all. We got any questions? I'll turn the lights back on.
Stick to Ruby.
Just tell me about it, man. I want to.
Talk about Node outside after 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like with Oak, does it takes a whole like runtime and everything and package it into a single executable?
I'm actually not positive how Oak is pulling that off. I would assume it's in a similar way, so it's packaging it up with a Node runtime to get the executable, but I'm not actually positive.
But it all ends up in one file?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So like if you do that, then the way that you distribute that is like on a website, you click and download it?
Yeah, you can set it up. You can set it up that way. You can set it up on Homebrew, set up a Debian package.
Okay.
But because you've got that single executable, that's going to make that much
So
easier.
like, what is it about like Node and like Ruby that lend themselves to like you can do it? Like why is Python, for example, not in there? Is it they just didn't decide to go with it, or is it like the way that VMs work? It doesn't really like node modules and like the button like the button directories is easier because they exist within the.
Yeah, I'm not positive. I would assume with the enclosed.io folks, they just don't, because they use Ruby, they don't use Python. So
Yeah.
they didn't work on it. Dealing with the Python 2, Python 3 nonsense, frankly, it's nonsense, would probably be too much. Python 3 is not backwards compatible with Python 2, and so every time you use a library, you have to make sure all the dependencies are Python 2 or Python 3.
So with Go, why is Go like used? Like whenever you use Go to build an executable, it's all like in there, right? Like what is it for like the shared object or something? That's the reason why they. No, yeah, Go statically linked though. So why would you use that something like that with Go?
Yeah, well, so Go's compiled versus Ruby's interpreted, so I don't have to package an interpreter with it because I'm just, the result of compiling is the binary that I can run. I may not have understood your question. Say that
Yeah, so
one more time.
I guess in the last slide you said that like I don't know, version 4 to 6 or something, like it was a blend of Go and Node.
Yes.
Does that mean like the actual tool was developed in Go or that it was used for Go?
Yeah, so my understanding from reading the article was they built the main CLI in Go so that they could have the cross-compiled executable, and then the plugins were built in Node.
Okay.
And then they replaced that core CLI so that it was also written in.
Okay.
And it was the same kind of consideration, like they wanted to ensure that folks didn't have to know both Node and Go in order to work on the CLI.
So, Oak is it strictly a real command line interface thing? I ask because I'm unfamiliar with the idea of Node being used anywhere but in a web context.
Yes, so because Node is for running JavaScript on the server, so we can use this. So there are like a number of CLIs, very popular CLIs that are written in Node as well. So like Yarn, which is a replacement for NPM, the Node package manager. All themselves also written in Node. I think the NPM client's written in Node.
So this is stuff I can just run in Bash then?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And so if you've got the Node interpreter, you can use npm install to get whatever CLI you want. You install it globally. So very, very similar to Ruby Gems.
I noticed the expando syntax looks a lot like alternation in regular expressions. Is that the bulk of how you designate these various paths you follow, or is there additional syntax to expand it?
Yeah, so the syntax is pretty limited. When I built it, so I should have built it as an actual, it's not really a compiler because it's like a translation language, but I should have built it like a compiler. So I should have actually had like a lexer and a parser, but like I don't have a CS degree, so I never took a compiler class. So like all that stuff was just the thing I knew about from my CS friends who were like, oh, compiler class, no. So I've actually started learning that. It's not as terrible as I thought. You should look into building compilers. It's really cool. So I'm rewriting it now to actually behave that way so that I can do things like nest those phrases inside of each other, because that's not really supported right now.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could like insert like an external list, for instance.
Yeah, want to have that, want to be able to have like variables like that. None of that's really supported. It's pretty simple syntax right now. The main thing is that phrase combination, which is really dumb. It just goes through, it creates arrays for each one of those lists of phrases, does the Cartesian product of all of them, and then puts the various values, and then, just spits all of that out. So there are some core pieces that definitely, so it's like I'm at this point already where I need to rewrite a lot of the core functionality anyway, so it's like one of those opportunities to maybe move to another platform, but gosh, I don't like writing JavaScript or TypeScript. TypeScript makes it marginally better, but it's still.
ES6 makes it marginally better. TypeScript makes it more annoying. I have a question. What's your Halloween costume? We never answered that.
That's a great question. So my fiance, my partner in the business, we were feeling pretty like. We've been watching The Next Generation on Netflix, giving it a full rewatch. She'd never watched it, and so we got online. We're like, you can get those patterns for those costumes. She can sew. We're gonna make them ourselves. And this was like really grandiose idea. Of course, we never did any of it. So, but now we also don't have a Halloween party to go to, so we're kind of glad we didn't spend that money.
Ethan is putting it. And he's bringing in the 8-foot subway. What was it?
Yeah.
Yes, there we go.
The 8-foot subway, is that what?
I mean, my default is, and I just kept this one around in case I needed like a Halloween costume last minute. It's like, it's a t-shirt that says America, and it's just normal street clothes, but then the arms of a bear costume. Can anyone guess what it is?
Oh my God.
It's the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment! Hey! It takes people a second.
Okay, question. You didn't mention curses at all. I realize it's not strictly command line, but it is character.
Yes. I realized that pretty late in the day today, and I didn't have time to put together a section on curses. So curses is a way of creating kind of pseudo-windowed interfaces in text. So if you've ever opened the BIOS on your Windows PC at home, that's operating in curses. There's some cool stuff. There's some people are doing some. I've seen a node library for doing data visualization, so it supports all kinds of live time series data visualizations, like bar graphs, line charts, maps, really crazy stuff, all in text, which is it's cool, but why? Why are we doing that? It's not.
Oddly enough,
1968.
I'm working on a REPL at home. It's one of those things, those many things that I've done that I will use extensively, but probably nobody else ever will. And I was toying with the idea of, for completion, instead of doing it the way Bash does, which I think is awful, or the way Vim does, which I think is a little better. What if I hit tab and then a scroll box of choices pops up?
Yeah, and they're I can't remember the name of the other. There was this other terminal project trying to be a futuristic terminal this guy was working on, and he got some Patreon funding, and then it still never happened. But yeah, I've seen things like that, and it's just because it's such an entrenched standard. Obviously, it's tough to really innovate on top of a standard that's 60 years
I never
old.
really have seen a REPL mixed with curses, but I'm glad you've seen it, so at least I know it'll sort of work.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good idea. Oh, okay, cool.
Need to turn the lights off again.
Yeah.
This is pastel.
So this is the lolcat, but looks like a cow. It's cow, so it's fortune, cow, say, lolcat. So you get a combination of all of these command line tools. I just want to put that out. I think that was mentioned in a chat.
What do ponies say?
So this is, wait, where is it? You can't see that, can you? God made everything out of nothing, but the nothingness shows through. So you can have that come up automatically. That's not visible. You can have that come out automatically every time you open up a new terminal. So, anyways, I was gonna that's a counter argument too. You can't do a lot of cool things with these
Rainbow
terminals.
gradients.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you developed any intuition or best practices around
Yeah.
Particularly when different flags require each other,
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say generally the best practice is just test all the time, especially if it's something you're going to release publicly. No, that's a good point. Like I believe there's a, I can't remember the name of the library now, but for folks that are still riding the Cucumber train, Cucumber's like it's a way to create tests in natural language, sort of. So there's a library for testing CLIs, I know, specifically in Cucumber. But yeah, beyond that, I would just say I'm a fan of both over-testing and over-documenting. Generally, I subscribe to the literate style of programming, which is like comment everything that happens. Because like it's, the nice thing is if I make a mistake in my English grammar, the Ruby interpreter isn't going to throw an error about it. And it's super easy. And then I can, anyone else can read through my code and know exactly what is happening. CoffeeScript is written that way. All Jeremy Ashkenaz's stuff is written literate style. And I prefer it. Oftentimes I'll go back and look, you've probably had the experience, you go back and look at something from 6 months ago and think, what idiot wrote this? Get blamed. This idiot wrote it. So it's a lot easier to document your code.
If you come across any patterns of like when you're developing the interface for these kind of interfaces, and you're like, oh wait, I've run this issue before, let me not do it this way and do it some other way?
None that spring to mind right now. Expando itself is actually like the CLI itself is pretty simple. It only has like a couple of commands that it's really exposing. Most of the complexity is in the stuff that it's doing for you. So not really, none that come to mind. In case anybody needs to get out of here, come talk to me if you have any questions, any further questions. Thank you all so much for coming out.
Thank you, Matt. Here's the food. Still plentiful. So grab whatever you can, whatever you want, or you're responsible for taking the table. Thank you again for sponsors. Thank everyone for coming. Stay mingle. We've got the room for 9. And see you at the next one.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
You're the first person I heard out of college who's even said Professor John Shipman, huge.
I guess let's chat about it. Like what, typically when we sponsor, we like to space them out by a couple of months.
Okay.
So, the next one we'll be like January.
That's when, so Austin on Rails, this month is the last month for this year.
Yeah.
So November is Thanksgiving, December is Christmas. So October is the last one for Austin on Rails, and then we'll have November and December Austin RB, and then we'll start January. We won't have Austin RB because the first week, we're coming from New Year's break. Yes. So Austin on Rails will be like the fourth Tuesday of January, and that would be the next thing of the year. And so that's typically how the next 3 months will go.
Yeah, let me take a look at like what our lineup looks like for the next couple of months. I know we're just kind of coming through the end of like a planning cycle, so I'm literally just starting to put my head down and kind of put pieces in place from like now through March. Okay. So I'll be able to tell you a little bit better in a couple of minutes.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, we
when
appreciate.
When is Austin on Rails for this month? When is it
The 23rd.
23rd?
I think that's the Tuesday.
No, it's an evening thing.
Yeah, I think that would be the 21st is a Saturday.
Like for example.
That one might be tough, just because I know I'm gonna be out of town, like at a conference, so I don't know if there'd be anybody to.
Okay, that's cool. Just for me to know, obviously we appreciate tremendously what you've already done. But I mean, you've been great so far. So
I appreciate you having me in a couple of times. It's been a lot of fun, and it's cool to see the same faces too. What I was really impressed by this time is I think you guys had like 15 RSVPs and we had 16 people in the room. So is that fairly common? You usually see like most people who RSVP show up? Or?
No, and yeah, so I'll have to check the list this time. But a lot of the times what happens is that the people who RSVP aren't the same people who show up. And the people who show up don't necessarily RSVP. But it's something weird that was happening in the beginning of the month where I had a bunch of people who automatically RSVP to every single one and never show up to anyone who cares. So now it's becoming now it's converging a little bit better. I don't know why. I didn't do anything to make it any different. Maybe Meetup, the group is, the website is getting better, the app is getting better, but like, not allowing people to just automatically RSVP all the time. Maybe there were a bunch of bots that they purged or something like that. But so yeah, we've been getting a little bit more closer RSVPs in the last couple of months than we used to.
Yeah, I guess. Okay. All right. So like,
because there was a time where there were like 20 something RSVPs and only get like 10 people. Or like you got 25 RSVPs, you order food for 20, 10 people show up, or like
everybody take 2 pizzas.
Yeah, so with this, like I would order like for 10 people and get enough food for 20 by the order for 10, and still would have leftovers. So now I did order for 15, which, like looking at it, I'm like, even ordering for 15, I still got a lot more food than.
Yeah. I think we sort of find the same thing in terms of drop-off rates, especially. Like we'll have I usually plan on like 40% of the people who RSVP
showing up
for our events
or drop off.
Well, show up.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like 50
That's
to 60% drop off. Okay. But part of that is because a lot of our events are free, and what we've been experimenting with recently is like putting a cap on the number of people who can be there, and it's totally changed the face of attendance. Like people, not only do more people sign up, but a higher percentage of them actually show up.
If you put a cap?
Yeah.
But how does that change it for them? That's weird.
It's like a perception thing.
Yeah.
But also like it's.
And is it highlighted? Sorry, is it highlighted that there's a cap?
Yeah.
It's like easy to know.
Yeah,
that
but we won't say. So it depends a lot on the event type. Okay. Where the actual cap is. A lot of the events that we do are like roundtable discussions. So we'll get like 10 people together for dinner over, and then we'll discuss a specific topic over dinner. And for those, the nature of the event is such that space is limited already.
Yes. And it's very personal. It's very small.
Right. You can't have a huge group there, otherwise it doesn't work right. But we've started sort of focusing on those more, and it's totally changed event attendance. So like we have people. North America is sort of a new community for us, and before this year, it was always outreach, trying to get people to show up, and that switch has totally changed it. So now, like, people sign up and they stick to it. And I actually got that tip from a Pluralsight meetup host in New York. He says, he runs a conference, which is actually where I'm going for the week of the 20th. But he says, we charge $10 for the conference ticket. It's just like having a tiny, some kind of hurdle keeps people from dropping off.
Yeah. So. I was like, to sign up, you have to pay. If you show up, you get a refund type of thing.
Yeah, people do that. There's a guy, have you heard about this? Oh, what's it called? The race that eats its young. It's that endurance race in, I think it's in Tennessee or Georgia or something like that. It's run like what's it?
I might have heard of it, but
there's a Netflix special on it. It's called the race that eats its young or something like that. But it's an endurance race. It's like 100 miles over the course of 3 days. You run basically for 3 days straight, and That guy charges, I think it's $5 to sign up, and you have to bring a pack of socks. And you give the socks to him. Like, that's how he gets all his socks for the year, is he just charges socks as the admission price. But the point, like, his point is,
That just makes it, so it makes you invested in something.
right. And it's not such a huge cost, but like,
It's
you have,
prohibitive, yeah.
or you have, like, you don't have any right to be disappointed if you don't finish the race. Or like, if it's a conference and the ticket is $10, like, you're pretty much just covering the cost of your food for the day. So it kind of, as the organizer, leaves you with room to play and do things that you want to do, and you don't have to take too much into account on the user's part. But yeah, that little investment helps a lot.
It's interesting. Where did the Rapid 7 people go? I wanted to, because they used to sponsor and then they stopped, and I want to ask them why they feel like why did they stop sponsoring meetups? I mean, trying to see if there's a trend there, if there's a reason, if there's something about it that made them stop, or it was just like, hey, the company isn't doing this anymore type of thing. It's kind of interesting to also know, because I've gotten more luck getting something like you or a recruiting agency to sponsor than an actual company that that does work.
Can I join?
Yeah.
Or you have
No.
talking serious stuff here?
Ann?
I think we'll just go straight in for now. Straight up, we'll just keep it. Okay.
Thanks for turning this line over.
That's right, that's right.
Well, two's company, three's the crowd.
Look at that. I'm kidding.
So how was it?
How was what? Oh, this was great. Yeah, it's very engaging. It's really interesting.
I love this style.
Yeah, it makes it look very easy to give presentations, and I'm sitting here just appreciating how really easy giving a presentation for the CMC.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I'm not doing it well. I would need to.
Not many do that well, to be honest. But yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that came out? Like he's a performer that came out, and I also love the visuals that he used in the slides and stuff like that. But obviously he didn't make them specifically for us. I wanted to take that pride, like, oh, you put in that effort into this, but we all know, they reuse those slides for other things. But it's okay.
I saw the Austin RV mentioned.
I know, I saw that. Yeah, that was subtle, but I saw that. Yeah. Yeah.
Would you consider yourself to be like similar to, say, a temp agency? Like an old school temp agency? A new version of that same one?
That's an interesting question. I guess I'm guilty of not knowing too much about old school temp agencies, but I'd say yes and no. So on the yes side, our job is to match the right person with the right project, which I feel like is pretty much what a temp agency does. The major difference to come to mind, first, this might be entirely ego, is the level of skill involved with most of the practitioners.
That's ego.
Yeah. Okay. So the other one is that there's a significant number of like long-term clients. So we have several people who've been working with the same client for years.
And they maintain a relationship with you, so the client pays you, you pay them.
Right, you get it now. So ultimately, they end up joining, and we do have a buyout clause, so if the client wants to bring a talent on as a full-time employee, they're perfectly able to do that, but that decision usually rests with the client. And what we're seeing more and more so these days is like a surprising number of clients who are looking for what is effectively full-time talent, but they want a freelancer instead. Part of that is just for flexibility, like in case things don't work out. Part of it is the money, but our rates are not that, it's not that much less expensive to hire a full-time freelancer through us. Yeah. What's that?
The Harlem drama. I guess is what your house is.
Yeah. I really think that could be part of it. But also, I mean, there's this, specifically with technical talent, it's a lot more difficult to figure out who's good and who's not. So I think that's what a lot of people are paying for as well. Like we put a lot of time into testing people and making sure that
There are a lot of different facets. A person is not level 1, 2, or 3.
Right.
A cornucopia of levels of anything.
Well, yeah, and I think if you look at our screening process, my impression of the screening process is that it's really designed on top of that. So there's not just one aspect to it. To take a developer as an example, I was a front-end dev, so I went through this as well. You effectively go through 4 stages. The first is sort of like a conversation, and I was telling John that in other countries it serves as English screening also, because we guarantee that everybody on the platform can work in English. But here in the States, where we deal with a lot of like native English speakers, super high proficiency in English, that first call is really more of like get to know you call, Q&A session, and they're also looking for like personality. So is it easy to have a conversation with this person? Right? After that, they go into strict technical testing, which is like algorithm puzzles, timed algorithm test, basically. So very, very strict CS, not something that a lot of developers in the field have actually spent a lot of time with.
Right. So you're ruling out a whole lot of people, by the way.
Sort of. Yes and no. So I'm very aware of this. My dad has been an enterprise Java developer for 20 years. Didn't pass that first screening, right? And I would actually say he's a better developer than I am, for sure. But the reason, there's more than one reason for having it. And this is something I tell talent all the time, because we have people who they won't get through it the first time. Sometimes they'll show up to an event out there and say, like I thought I was going to do it, but I just don't know that hardcore CS stuff, and I guess I'm not the kind of developer that top out. I'm like, nothing could be further from the truth. The reality that we all know is you're probably not going to be solving algorithm puzzles in your actual client.
Right. So why is this so important here?
Well, there's multiple reasons for this. So one, there are several aspects of the test. If you get through algorithm testing, you go to prepared programming exercise, and once you go through prepared programming, you go through a project phase. And so the goal there is to test, all right, how's this person's textbook knowledge work? What is it like to work with them one-on-one? So how do they actually solve problems? Live very much like the whiteboarding sessions, like Facebook. And then finally, like, what quality of product they deliver enough to their audience. And the reason we go across all those levels is because, well, we're working with extremely high caliber clients, and we want to make sure that anybody in front of them is a well-rounded expert, be trusted to operate on their own, right? We promise our clients expertise. We promise our talent high caliber clients, and we try to deliver on both sides of those to be like very, very
But it does require CS.
well,
It totally does.
do you have one or no?
No.
Does it matter?
No, and I do have one, and I wouldn't be able to do those tests either, to be honest. Because I haven't done that in so long, and I'm not going to study my algorithm book for this.
That, I think, is that's the hang-up. A lot of hardcore programmers that I've met assume that because they've got the industry experience, they'll be able to solve the puzzles. And they're not the same thing.
They're not the same.
What I'll say is this, though. So I had never solved hardcore CS algorithm. I was a front-end guy. I've never seen anything like that. But I was never past it. So my advice to everybody is just do the practice problems. Like they send you a link to 20 practice problems. And personally, I feel like if you do a few of them, you grasp it's more about knowing the structure of the problem. Because you've already solved like real life CS or real life computer problems. If you can understand what they're asking for, you can solve it. But
Right, but I'm not going to just be able to write a binary tree and I'm just not. That would take me a very long time.
yeah.
Many hours and a lot of research. I've done it, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's
And
been a
but-
while since I've
But
been
let's
there.
let's be honest. I mean, I totally get where you're coming from, and I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I think the conclusion that I'm getting to is that TopTal isn't necessarily interested in putting in junior developers instead of the clients, right?
Regardless of junior, you want people with a CS degree out of experience. Yes, but that's what you're testing for.
There's a difference though. We want somebody who, if they come up against a problem they haven't experienced, can figure out the answer. And
But that's bullshit. That's like an IQ test. That's bullshit. It's all about.
let me tell you this.
It's all about experience. It's all about what's it called? Now I'm blanking on the word. Now this is going back to the Arabic French thing. It's all about whether you've seen something like this before or not, right? This is why Western countries, the people from Western countries test higher than people from Eastern countries or Africa on IQ tests because they've seen it before. They've had exposure to it before. So bring a kid who's been plowing a field for his entire life and put him in front of a math problem. He's not going to be able to solve it. But is he dumber than the person who can? No, just because he hasn't seen it before, right? And that's what a CS degree does. It gives you exposure to these things over and over and over and over again by somebody who's an expert who knows how to teach you that. Reading a link in a blog post doesn't really teach you how to do as much.
So I think I will agree with you. Somebody with a CS degree would be able to solve those problems easier than somebody who hasn't had one. But my opinion, having gone through the test, is that anybody who's an experienced programmer can learn how to solve those problems in a couple of hours.
But still, you're saying experienced programmer. So you're still.
You're
You're
if
still.
anybody's kind of entry level, we would love to have them later on in their career. But we're the type of work.
Right, but that's what's going to be my point is that you're still narrowing sort of the pool of people that you want to do it. But that's what you're doing.
Right.
And you should own up to that and say, not try to be like, oh yes, but no, just that's what it is, right?
Well, that's
fine.
completely what it is. And the reason for that, though, is
It's understandable.
that, like, so, how do you guys freelance? You say you do contract work?
I do contract with Avid.
All right, yeah, you do. So there are other places where the contracts are more effectively raised to the bottom because they're available to anybody in terms of pricing. So, we're absolutely moving the talent field.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, like, this is a good thing. I'm not saying, like, I'm not criticizing for that. I totally get it because the problem with that, though, is you're sort of discriminating against a bunch of people, but that's in your business model, you have a business need to do that. And not discriminating against race, gender, or anything like that. You're just discriminating against sort of like, but it sort of is in a sense you might not be consciously aware of is that certain groups of people and gender minorities don't get to that level very easily because of their background. But that's not up to you to fix in a sense, right? That's a more of a general sort of industry problem.
You'll just end up, you won't have a very large pool of those people working at the moment.
And
That's
maybe,
not the problem they're trying to solve.
and maybe, and maybe not in a very long time too, because it's gonna take a couple of generations until we see parity in that, right? Where
I guess, so who do you think falls into that? Like, what is the group that's of highest concern?
highest concern,
Yeah. Is there
women and people of color. I mean, that's everybody that's not white male.
So is that?
Well, I think you would also have to throw in some money issues on that too, because again, CS degree, and that's going to cost a bunch of money.
I don't normally take a very strong stance on these
You
types of
are,
things,
you're
but I
just
will
talking
take
about
very
this.
strong stance on this. One does not need, I don't have a CS degree.
Right.
I have a business degree.
Yeah.
And you definitely do not need, it's not a requirement. Will it help you get through that first phase? Yeah, probably. But that won't help you get through phase 2 or phase 3.
Right.
somebody with hardcore experience in the industry is going to get through a pair programming exercise and a test project much easier than somebody who's going to see yesterday.
Right. So basically, you're screening out for a very high level. So like, if you have a meter, like your basic, intermediate expertise, you want the high of all of them.
Yeah, it's somewhere on the. You can usually find it plastered on the marketing top 3%, which it's roughly one. Actually, it's roughly like it's a little bit over 1%.
So the problem that I think where we're coming from that is that misses out on a lot of potential and a lot of people who would be great but will not pass all of those tests, right? And so, but I totally get it because I'm also. Let me.
Question: Do you believe that you are on the side of the person who could pass, or do you feel like you're in the pool of people who couldn't pass?
No, but let me answer this a little bit differently. So what I do in my work is I take somebody like Ann and Sam and give them the projects, but I am sort of in between where I was like, okay, I have the expertise, I have the knowledge, I have the background, I have the multiple years of experience in the industry and all that kind of stuff. So whenever their stuff, I come in, but they're still able to do the job for the clients and still produce a high quality thing and all that kind of stuff, but it's a little bit buffered by my presence. Right? But I'm trying to eliminate myself out of the job eventually, but for the time being, this is sort of my approach of, okay, all the clients that you're working with probably would be the same clients that I'm working with, but I'm still able to bring in people who would never pass, shouldn't say that, who wouldn't pass those
That's
tests.
the question, and this is the big hang up, and I think it's hindered a little bit by the fact that I've seen the tests, and I'm not sure if you guys have looked at it yet. I'm assuming you have.
I haven't seen the tests.
Okay. So I think a lot of people see like the top 3% thing, and they automatically assume the tests are much harder than they actually are. And really, that's not it. And the other thing I'll point out as well. So just from talking with both of you, I know that both of you could get into the net. I know it, and I know it. And
I'm confident.
And I feel comfortable saying it. It's like. Maybe you'd struggle with the CS, right? But you are absolutely capable of passing it if you have the right time to practice. And
here's the thing: you need somebody who's independent and is able to work independently on their own with the client, right?
Yes.
Right.
And they're hiring senior.
Right. I don't think everybody can be independent.
True.
But if they're independent, doesn't mean that they won't be able to do good work, right? So this is where you're narrowing your pool down, right? You're saying, I want one person who's independent. Whereas I believe that there are people who could be very good producers within a team if they have the right support to do that. And so your focus is on individuals.
I can see that. I don't see a problem with this.
I don't know, that's what I'm saying.
The product that he is creating is
That's exactly what I'm saying, is that I think they're geared towards this thing, which is not bad, which is not an awful thing, which is not a bad thing, it's just, yeah, absolutely.
I guess at the risk of sounding like too much of a salesperson, I'll stop trying to convince you the other way. All I'll say is that I go to hundreds, not hundreds, but dozens of events every single year. I speak with thousands of people every year. And the vast majority definitely could get in, but they either build the screening process up to be something more than it is, or there's a certain luck component as well. Sometimes you just pull a question that you don't know how to solve. You don't know what the proper algorithm is in order to solve.
Or you're blank or something, whatever.
Yeah, or you're having a rough week, whatever it is. I will say this though, it's not just about screening for a specific skill set. When you're operating at this level, what matters, okay, so I'm a great example. This is a great example. I had never written vanilla JavaScript before I started my screen. When I heard about TopTrow, I was like if I was using JavaScript, I was mostly jQuery. But primarily HTML, CSS, and I just PHP work, did a little bit of like,
Yeah.
I heard about the company, and I thought to myself, okay, probably not gonna get in, but I will get a list of things to work on so that I can become and I put a lot of time in, busted my ass for like 3 weeks of intense studying and practicing and stuff like that. And I ultimately made it through, but I made it through sort of just barely. And the screener was telling me, he said, you know, this is not the cleanest code that I've ever seen, but if you just started learning this and you've got it to this level, I can find you what to do. And I think that's the side of the company that we don't really get to talk about often, or that we may not see through the marketing, but it's extremely, the thing that sets us apart is the human touch. So it's not an algorithm that's matching you up with a client, it's a person. Like you have a matcher and they understand.
This is what I'm missing from your pitch. This is why I'm like, well, the things you're saying are congruent to the other things you're saying. Now I understand more of what you're saying.
And I'll say, so like there's been other situations, you mentioned the CS problems. So I've talked with our head of operations on this, and he and I had this exact same question. Because I said, my dad's a fantastic developer. He's definitely a better developer than I am. He didn't get in. That's a problem with our screening.
I'm hanging out.
Okay, we'll talk tomorrow.
Yes.
All right.
Anytime in the afternoon.
Okay.
Right there.
I'll reach you in Slack. Drive safe. Good to see you. Good to meet you. Awesome, awesome. Then we'll hope to see you next time.
You better, like,
And I'll also leave the sign up for the Slack chat.
Yeah, definitely. Tweet at us and we'll do it.
we're gonna hold you to that.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I was talking to him, like, this is a problem with the screening process. Because here's this fantastic developer who did not get in. And he goes, no, that's not the only purpose that we got that test. The reason we have that test, yes, assess general technical ability, but more than that, it's to see what happens when somebody runs into something that they're not. And to that end, like the way my dad handled it was, he didn't study right up until he went to the test, took the test, he failed it, and I mean, he's got tons of other options. He never follows up on it. But I have literally, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Personally, like, firsthand seen people who failed, then they went out, researched the answer, wrote up what they would have done, sent it off to the screener, and they got passed through to the second option. Because the screeners understand there's like almost no situation in which you're going to be sucking somebody out.
Sorry?
For the capital effect.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
Supposedly, is it still 9?
It's gonna validate.
Yeah, they should be there. Is the event still happening? They'll probably be around.
Can the security people mail it?
Because they're expanding.
No, if they're not here, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's like 10, right?
It's cool, yeah, I was just
Yeah, we
thinking
took
the other
it
day.
up, and they all open up. And
Maybe
you're
we
just
should do it on one of those, it's been like 5 years.
Or a really short problem.
But no, that is, no, it's an interesting point, because to see what people do.
Right, there's an immensely human element to it, which in some sense it's not really advertised by design. Part of the job of the advertising is to scare away anybody who may not perform or even think of themselves as a because, to be honest, we've got limited capacity. Right? We can only have so many people do like all of this is handled one-on-one, and the world's full of developers. So, in some sense, you know, it's there to scare a certain type of person off.
Are you taking the chicken with
My
you?
general opinion is, having meetings like this, there are very
As in all of it?
people here who could not actually pass it. If it's, you know, it's just a matter of
Yeah, that's.
getting your hands dirty on it, like a little bit new.
Those my comments say.
The people that have more capability underestimate their ability, and the people that have less capability overestimate their capability. So really what you're advertising is for a bunch of people with less capability to try and make it.
Well, that's why a lot of my time is in encouraging people, because a
display their abilities. And I just said this.
When you're smart enough to know you're not the best.
Yeah.
You know enough to know that you
But
don't
also,
know all things.
if you're smart, you know that you don't know everything.
Right.
Like you know very little, right? And so, I mean, that's the
That is the gift and the curse
The
of
curse,
being
yeah.
an intelligent person. Because I think it keeps us, it keeps us from doing a lot as well. And then it's something that we deal with all the time. We have one of the big reasons we have a lot of these community programs is because we deal with what I would consider to be type A personalities. Like everybody is just really good at what they do. Everybody comes from this incredible background or some of these amazing projects, and everybody is like riddled with self-doubt and fear that they're not good enough. And so, like a lot of our time kind of goes into just kind of reassuring people, being like, look, if you got here, you belong here.
So let me counter that with another question. What do you do to build talent?
Great question. So
Because
that,
let me put that with a little bit of sort of why, because I think when you say everybody comes here with skills and talent, all that kind of stuff, that's not actually always true. There are people who haven't had the opportunity to take the time to study or take the time to do all the things or be exposed to certain things. There's a gap between people who've had the experience, who've had the knowledge, who've had the mentorship, who've had all that kind of stuff, who've had the ability, who've had the financial stability, who've had all those privileges, and people who haven't had any of it but have the desire and have the knowledge, have the passion, and have the mental capacity, and will have the potential, but they just need somebody to spark it or somebody to push it and somebody to develop it. And so what do you do on that front?
Well, so there's a few things.
And you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to say that we do
I
have
do have
something.
an answer because this actually relates directly to what my team does. So the community team is I'm not actually a recruiter. I don't serve a recruiting role at all. The reason we support different events, it's great to get visibility, but TopTal isn't necessarily the right choice for a lot of people. So when we have our meetings about like what are our goals and stuff like that, recruiting doesn't really play into it at all. My team's job is to do the stuff that you just mentioned. So like our written purpose is to make TopTal the #1 choice for talent.
What are you thinking? It's a conversation, not a grilling session. If you're not taking a container with you, throw it away. That's my task for you.
That's terrible. There's many people outside that would
Well then, take it to
be
them.
happy to have those containers.
Take it to them. Your job is either to take it, donate it, or throw it away. Pick one. So your team does it job, which is great.
We've got lots. There's kind of
And
two
I also
questions to that. There's
know some of these answers more than I let on, by the way. Like just for the sake of, because I see your resources, I see some of your posts and all that kind of stuff. I've seen some of that, learning material, educational materials that you put out, which actually sort of surprised me at first. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Okay, TopTal is every now and then it pops up on my Google search for certain things that I wanna Google or whatnot. So I know. I'm just trying to see your answer to it, just to have a complete sort of vision and understanding.
I think there's two sides to the question. On the one hand is how do you develop the talent who are already in the network, so the people who already have this opportunity, and how do you build up the next generation of talent, like how you provide the opportunity to somebody else. On our side, on the talent side, there's a lot of programs that are designed to help build whatever skills the talent most interested. So whether that's an internal academy to help like build up new skills, sort of new technology, or we have things like speakers or things like free flows like memberships, ability to publish a blog, like that, professional stuff like that. On the other side, we do stuff like we have a women in tech scholarship, where we have women all over the world get $10,000 scholarship.
Why did you say that in front of her?
Did it come up? Plus
The women are right there. They should say that a little bit louder.
Plus they get a year of mentorship with
somebody in the network. So like mentoring and giving back is actually a huge.
That's awesome. But we should talk about those a little bit more.
Thanks a lot, Yusuf.
Yo, man, it was a great presentation. It was very entertaining, and it's very all the things that you want to see in a presentation. Yeah. How was a good job training you? I don't know. Yeah.
I trained him on Rails actually for a little while.
What?
I was working with him on Rails for a little while.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. It was cool.
What was the flavor there?
It was called Relativity and Mr. Underfoot. It was about a cat that, so it's about these two people who went to the lab with Einstein's brain, and their cat eats Einstein's brain and becomes possessed by the personality of Einstein. And it was,
Where did the cat?
no, I was one of the scientists. Hal was the cat. It was an invisible cat that he voiced from the audience. So it was like an implied cat that we had to look at and talk to.
Please tell me that he said he wrote it. That sounds great.
He wrote it. I don't know actually. I don't think anyone recorded it. I think it's lost to the mist of time.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
See y'all around. Have a good one.
Yeah. Thank
And then
you,
we've
Jen.
got that. Yeah, the other thing I'll mention too, just because this came up. People who haven't had the opportunity is that we just launched a program called Top Talent, which allows Top Talent to volunteer for your skills at nonprofits all over the world. And specifically, we're working with the Tech Foundation, which works with a lot of refugees.
Thank you. Okay. Everything, all the questions I asked you is what I've just been probing you to sort of like, hey, these are the things that people do.
That's what people want to hear about when I stand up and talk. So maybe a story would be better than like an introduction.
Something like that. I mean, listen, there's a lot of, I think the problem with everybody, and myself included, you know, with a lot of the stuff that we do